My individual research group focused on formative assessment, and the article that I chose focused on peer learning and learning-oriented assessments. So to get a big picture, why is formative assessment so important? Well, in any classroom, whether it's blended or traditional, formative assessments measure the effectiveness of our learning modules or our learning events. They also give us data so we can individualize instruction. Whether or not we intend it, formative assessment also sends a message to our students. It tells them what we value, what do we think is important, because we assess what we value. In a blended learning environment, it's often difficult and not obvious how to develop things like interpersonal skills and creativity. But if that's something that we truly value, we need to assess that in some way in a blended environment. So, how do we foster creativity and interpersonal skills? Well, we want to create virtual learning communities. We need to create opportunities for students to interact, and these need to happen often so that they can build a trusting relationship with one another. Along with that, we try to avoid external rewards that don't function as well as intrinsic rewards. And we try to form these virtual learning communities so that there's not so much competition, so we don't pit students against one another. So, in a virtual learning community, we need some type of peer assessment, because if we value something in a course, we need to assess it in some way, and peer feedback is important, so it needs to be included in the formal assessment. However, when we form small groups, group members should not really assess each other formally, because that doesn't lead to a cooperative nature in the group. So, how do we build effective peer partnerships, or those small groups who won't be formally assessing each other but really cooperating together? There are 5 major characteristics that this article pointed out. First and foremost, it has to be voluntary. Secondly, trust needs to be established, so they need to have contact on a pretty regular basis, so they have the opportunity to build that trusting relationship. This is also a reason why they can't grade each other formally, because grading someone that you're supposed to be cooperating with never works out. The trust is broken in that situation. One other focus is that this needs to be a mutual relationship. That means that it can't have one student be tutoring another one. They have to be at the same level. They both need to value from the relationship. It's not one student doing the teaching, the other one doing the learning. They have to learn together in some authentic capacity. So, one example in the article on how a teacher did this at the college level is they formed individual groups, and to take out that competitive nature, they had each group designed their own assessment rubric for a project that they were doing. In order to build accountability, they had each group member contribute to a reflective journal that documented their process and how they refined and changed things as they worked on their project. So forming these individual groups really facilitated collaboration. Students were accountable for their own work. They had to monitor their own process and their own learning. That accountability was built in because of that journal assignment, because you had in-group members reviewing the reflections of other students. They also were accountable to the class at large and their larger class of their peers, because they had to post their rubrics and their journals for the entire class to see, and those rubrics and journals would be part of the formal assessment given by their larger group of peers. The article also suggested that the journals were very important to kind of get a feel of the group dynamic, who was the leader of the group, who was contributing the most. So finally, the formal peer assessment, that was done by peers, but not peers in the actual group. So the emphasis on that peer assessment focused on the group's output, output or their performance task. How well did they design a rubric? How well was their group dynamic formed? And that was made by the journal articles because you can't really see how a group functions without some documentation of it. And then finally, they also assess the actual project that the group created. And if you'd like to see more about this article, you can get it at Assessment and Evaluation in Higher Education.